Hello, welcome to this week's edition of Rugby League Back Chat. It's all kicking off in the world of Rugby League, so to talk us through it, we have three very special guests, starting with the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler, the managing editor of 4020 magazine, Phil Caplan, and the chief executive of the Rugby Football League, Ralph Rimmer. Gentlemen, welcome. It's all going off, isn't it, on the field, this I don't want to call it a relegation race, because you're not racing to be relegated, are you? You're racing to avoid it. But we now have a new team at the bottom. It isn't London Broncos. Phil, they've won again. They just won't go away, will they?
I think they've been amazingly credible. I think if you spoke to everybody who ever did a prediction at the start of the season, you looked at their recruitment, they made the very brave decision of sticking with predominantly the championship players that had got them up. Very few thought they would win many games, if any. So to be already where they are, who they've beaten, the amount of points they've accrued, the style in which they've played, and I think the one thing that's probably been overlooked, the fitness that they've got. I think absolutely outstanding strength and conditioning work being done in the capital. You add in the personality of their coaching staff, which they clearly represent. They've been a breath of fresh air, and I think there's now a lot of people thinking they'd actually enhance Super League if they were still in it next year. I think the one worry, because this is Rugby League, we can't be too positive for too long, is...
I'm going to make you be positive.
that team is already on the verge of breaking up. Now, I think they've got a real incentive to do something this year. I think if they don't get relegated, that is something that they'll all remember when they meet in years to come, being a massive achievement, in some respects, as much as winning a trophy. But it's such a shame that two of the teams that I think we've really enjoyed watching this year, who've overachieved in the nicest possible sense, that's Salford and London. We already are talking about their teams being picked off.
That's true though, isn't it? But, you know, it's funny, Jordan Abdul is in a really strange position, isn't he? Because I think he's been one of the outstanding players of the year in Super League this year. The way he's developed, the way he's, you know, controlled these games for London is quite amazing. And yet he's supposed to be going to Hull Kingston Rovers next year. A lot of people thought there was a potential conflict for him playing against Hull KR last
Didn't
Thursday.
look like it.
But it didn't, certainly, you know, there wasn't. He played, you know, as well as any player I've seen for quite a while. And yet Hull KR could be in the Championship next year, couldn't they? And
I'm sure that's in his contract.
There must be a get-out clause, you would imagine, wouldn't you?
Go on, Ralph.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that there is, of course there would. But it's strange. Sometimes you do get a team of mavericks, which I think London are, and I think Abdul fits there really, really well. And it brings the best out in those players, and then you try and sort of re-immerse them in another team, and it never quite clicks for them.
I think that's right.
It seems to be in a really good environment at this moment in time. You know, London are, you know, having watched them, you know, lots last year, and they haven't changed a great deal. You know, they were a young team, they're a light team, they play on a 4G pitch, which is very, very quick. And when the sun comes out, that suits all of that. So I always thought they were liable to pick up some wins when it got hotter, and that's proving the case. They've actually, I thought their vulnerability was probably in size and strength, but nevertheless they seem to have endured through all that, and you know, they're just playing fast, exciting rugby league.
I think the other thing about them is they're a team full of stories. That every one of them has either got a point to prove, or, you know, you take Morgan Smith, for example, over the last 2 weeks has been one of the main catalysts for the results that they've been having. It's almost as if he's had to wait to find that environment where he can fulfil his talent that we know
Well, he was
he's
waiting
got.
on the sidelines at Warrington, wasn't he? And a young player in that situation is always waiting for players to get injured so he can get a break. So if you're at a club like that and they don't get many injuries, which Warrington don't seem to do for one reason or another, then you don't get your breaks. And so, you know, he had to go elsewhere to actually realise his potential.
And you look at Eddie Batty, for example, who's been one of the form props of the season. He may even be a dream team selection when we get to the end of the season. Waits till he's in his, 27? The Buffalo farmer from South Yorkshire who's given his one chance to play in Super League, and he's knocking them dead. And Alex Walker, who's come through the system at London. You know, we talk about where are we going to expand our reservoir of players. Well, there's one who I think, again, is arguably one of the most talented natural fullbacks we've got in the competition at the moment. And it's great that he's getting his opportunity to show it on the big stage.
The way he was getting under those Jordan Abdul high bombs, you know, against Hull Kingston Rovers was tremendous, wasn't it? We're a tremendous understanding between those two players.
And I think we need to credit Wayne Bennett as well for bringing Danny Ward into now the international arena, making him an assistant coach with Great Britain, along with Ian Watson. We were talking about the two teams that perhaps have overachieved this year. It's great reward, but it hints of succession planning as well.
Sure,
It's a really good appointment.
Are we at a point now for the first time, Ralph, where we can say London aren't the favourites to go down? Or is it still too soon for that?
No, I would suspect we're probably at that point at this moment in time. You mentioned Danny, and I do think those 2 coaching appointments are fantastic. Really, a really positive signal for everybody in the rugby league playing world in this country. To be honest, I've always had a soft spot for Danny. He's got a real warmth about him. When I went to the £1 million game last year, which was, there was a huge amount at stake in that game. The most relaxed guy in the stadium by a million miles prior to the game was Danny Ward, and he just exuded.
And he communicates that to his players.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I've no doubt that the Toronto players went into that game very tense, and there were no tries scored. And Danny he's got something about him. I think I'm really pleased to see him involved, as I am with Ian Watson, involved in the Great Britain setup.
So Martyn, Ralph says that London now aren't the favourites to go down. So who are?
Well, on the way they're playing at the moment, you've got to say Leeds Rhinos, and you've got to be fairly blunt about it. Obviously, Hull Kingston Rovers are playing tonight in the derby against Hull. That's a massive game for them, and we'll have to see. I mean, you never know what the result of a Hull derby will be, and on recent form, Hull FC have been outstanding, but Hull Kingston Rovers playing at home are going to be a real challenge, and they need the points badly. But you've got to say that I was talking to somebody who had been watching Leeds closely at St Helens, and they were saying Saints were played badly actually in that game, but still were far too good for Leeds. And
I think a lot of teams have been
Leeds.
The same,
Leeds just we keep expecting Leeds to revive, don't we? We keep saying, or we have kept saying, that Leeds are going to pull out of this downward spiral. But time's running out for them. And if they don't start doing it very soon, they're really going to be in big trouble. I
think Richard Agar's right at the moment in what he says, that it's in their own hands. And part of that will be determined by the fact that the bulk of their remaining fixtures, and we have got a third of the season left, are at home. Now, that can work for you if you win on Sunday against Catalan, which is suddenly a very, very big game.
Yeah. Sure.
But if you lose, then that home crowd becomes a real negative that you have to get over. But there's a lot more twists and turns because everybody's still got to play each other. I'm not sure there is a favourite to go down.
No, I don't think there is.
I think there's
actually
a team perhaps who aren't in form at the moment. And the biggest game this weekend is Wakefield and Huddersfield. Because one of those teams will be stuck on a losing run. And you get in a losing run on the wrong time of the season, and it's very hard to get out of.
And that's the reason why I kind of am on the side of London not being the favourite. It's probably not, well, it's not due to kind of talent on the field, but when you get to this pressure cooker at the end of the season, you want teams that are composed and look like they enjoy playing rugby league and are not, becoming kind of introverted in their thinking and too introspective, just going out there and throwing the ball around and having fun, as opposed to being, and there will be lots of nerves involved in all those teams. You want a team that is just playing vibrantly, and I think they are.
I have only one reservation for London, and the bookies still think that they are the favourites, although the odds are lessening, and that is if they were to get injuries. Because we've identified some of their key players who are playing brilliantly at the moment. But what they didn't have, and still don't have, is squad depth. So if you to take 2 or 3... I mean, Luke Yates has been arguably one of the finds of the season. I don't think anybody had heard of him when London signed him. He's top of the tackle charts. He's making an average of about 45 a game. For you to take somebody like him out of that, Jordan Abdul maybe unfortunately had to go missing for a couple of weeks because he got injured, which does happen. That's where I would worry for London, not the guys they've got on the field at the moment.
But at the moment, they've not got too many, and they're at Castleford this weekend, which is...
Who are another team that have forgotten how to...
That's a really interesting game, I think. I mean, not long ago, you'd have said that's just a... I mean, Castleford won 40 points to 6 in London. I think it was the 3rd or 4th game of the season. And, and that was a time when we were saying, London, my goodness, they're not really up to it. But now, I would think Castleford are probably more worried about that game than London are.
How many points do you think a team is going to need to avoid the drop?
At least 20, but maybe even more.
Ralph, you will know that there are plenty of conspiracies that go on in the world of rugby league. Yes. One at the moment is that Leeds go down. There will be a way to make sure that they stay up. Just to clarify, that's not going to be the case if Leeds get relegated.
No, nobody's told me if that's the case.
just seems to be the sort of thing that is brought up all the time, isn't it, Martin? A league restructure
well,
to
that
save
would
the
just be
team.
ridiculous, wouldn't it?
But it
Yeah.
raises a very interesting question, which we might as well ask while Ralph is here. What if Super League decided Leeds weren't going to go down? What could the RFL do about that on the basis of the fact now that we have dual governance of the sport?
We do have dual governance, but we have an agreed mechanism for promotion and relegation, and that's signed up from both sides. So I don't think there's any concerns at this moment in time. If Super League in the future, and I don't mean on the back of Leeds, well, hopefully they won't get that, but if that was determined in the future, that would have to be a kind of collegiate approach from us both when we decided that 10 was a better number or 16 was a better number, whatever it is, but that would be the mechanism.
Well, here's a scenario. Let's assume that Leeds do go down. Let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that Leeds do go down. What impact would it have? Well, going into the Championship now is a lot better than going into the Championship would have been a few years ago, because the Championship itself is a highly vibrant competition. One of the things that you've got to do over the next few years, Ralph, is to persuade broadcasters, I think, to cover the Championship, on a more regular basis, as a genuine elite competition in its own right. Leeds being there, I think, would actually be a massive help for you in doing that.
How is that progressing, Ralph? There has been a lot of talk about Championship broadcast deals. There's been talk that they've been talking about maybe going to 16 because they think that could work. What can you tell us?
Yeah, well, first of all, the competition is a competition. The numbers aren't going to change at this moment in time. Mm-hmm. Clearly, on the far side of a broadcast contract, depending on what that looks like, that might have a bearing on it. Martyn's right when we're talking about the state of play on the field in Super League. The state of the play in the competitions below is fantastic. The tension in all three divisions is absolutely palpable at this moment in time, and that's what you want. You want uncertainty of outcome, and believe me,
shock results
from top to bottom. We have that at this moment in time. Swinton went away to Toulouse, 2 weeks ago, and won there, which 50-1 they were against on that fixture. Unbelievable.
Barrow at Featherstone last weekend.
Featherstone, I wasn't going to mention that, but that's absolutely right. So. The competition structure is what it is. Clearly, we may have 1 or 2 overseas clubs coming up, hopefully. I do think this competition is the Championship and League One. Championship, the standard is really, really increasing every year. I think whoever goes up will stay up again, just as perhaps London will, and that's a real testament to what happens in these competitions and the way teams are developing and taking it more seriously. We've implemented lots of little mechanisms that hopefully make people focus on the right things, growing crowds, and hopefully achieving better viewing audiences. And we've got our own platforms that we're putting some content out on as well.
How important
that seems to be biting in.
How important has our league been in the sense that you've now have got facts on how many people you have got watching these games? Going to broadcasters? What
we're doing at this moment in time is we are trying to reposition the sport and all of those things, setting up our own platforms, and delivering content. I think we had 3 games on our league this weekend in different competitions. All of that gives us viewership. All of that gives us data and information that we can pass on to potential broadcasters or sponsorship or sponsors or whatever it may be. We are looking to reposition the sport as our Super League as well. Yeah. We're coming into a really important point in our cycle, which is the broadcast negotiation, whatever that may look like, and it will look different. The landscape is completely different to whatever it was before. We have to position the sport in the best way to take advantage of that.
Is there a plan to equalise the revenue in the Championship? Because if there was one criticism at the moment, you can look at the league table and there are odd, quirky results, but virtually the teams are in the position of the funding that they've got access to. Super League is becoming more uncertain because at last the salary cap seems to be biting to equalise on that respect. But one of the problems, I think, with the Championship is Toronto are 10 points clear. We can't ignore the fact that there's a full-time team in effectively a part-time division.
That's not down to the central distribution. That's down to the.
But the distribution has affected the league table.
Well, this year it was more disparate last year. The spectrum was greater last year. We have concertinaed it in this year, but we've also introduced this return on investment mechanism, which basically says that you will be rewarded on a number of give-backs to the game. So the league position's 1, because that demonstrates your competence on the field, but also your attendance, our league membership, participation numbers, all the things that contribute to the game. So the clubs that are doing the right things get a bigger distribution. So that will actually distort the linear ladder, as it were. You could have a team producing all of those things, but not actually at the top of the competition, but nevertheless doing well in other categories. Because in the end, it comes back to repositioning the sport. We want the clubs to contribute to the sport going forward. And the RFL can't do that on its own. We need to point everybody in the same direction and produce the results that we know give it commercial equity and broadcast equity.
What does repositioning mean? Does it mean trying to attract a new audience? Does it mean retaining the current audience that we've got? Is it geographical expansion?
It's not necessarily geographical expansion. It's certainly growing audiences. That's a really key part of it. Repositioning how we deliver the sport broadcast-wise, we've been fairly innovative working with Sky on some of the championships and things that we've done. We've got our own platforms now. We've got some alternatives when it comes to that negotiation. It will not be the last TV deal that was done was bang. There is everything. That there's a big check, £200 million with a big bow around it. That's it. Everything's gone. It'll look completely different, and we need to be able to react to however that negotiation goes.
Phil, I've got to stop you there. Hold that thought. We'll be back after a short break for the next part of Rugby League Back Chat. You've spoken and we've listened. Rugby League Back Chat is available on podcast form from all your best podcast providers. If you're on a trip down the M62 or a flight to Toronto or Toulouse, download Rugby League Back Chat for the best debate inside Rugby League. Welcome back to Rugby League Back Chat. Before the break, Phil, you had a question you wanted to fire to Ralph. Now's your moment.
I just think while he's here, we should grill him as much as we can. The last television deal, and obviously what happens in 2021 with our primary broadcaster will determine where the sport goes from here.
Sure.
The cheque was signed to Red Hall and you distributed it.
That's right.
The word is that Super League will do that negotiation now. Are you worried that perhaps, when you open the envelope, there'll be nothing in it?
No. Because of all the work that we're doing to preempt that. Super League will do their own negotiation, absolutely right. It's their property, the Super League is their property, and they will be out in the market looking to find the best solution for them. We have, as a sport, we have a Challenge Cup, we have International Rugby League, we have Championship of League One, we have other things. We have Women's Rugby League that is suddenly, in a completely different place than where it was before. So as a governing body, I think we've got a great deal to offer. And we'll go out and we'll maximise the package and we'll make it work as far as our constituents work.
I think Phil's just segued me into a question that I wanted to ask you about your relationship with Robert Elstone.
Yes.
How does that work? Is it active? Is it fluent? Is it as proactive as it needs to be?
Yeah, I probably speak to Robert every week on a variety of different subjects. We're actually going to make that more formal. It is pretty casual at this moment in time. It just depends on what's actually happening. But the intent is that we'll just literally meet on a weekly basis just to talk through all the business of the day, whatever that may be. We want to be completely cohesive in the way that we work. In the end, both of us want to maximise what the sport can do.
You've had to obviously figure out how the split works, and there's been a lot of complications with that, I'm sure. How difficult has that been, and how long has that process actually taken?
It's been really difficult. You've had you've had one body that split into two, so everything was absolutely integrated. And when you start, taking the nuts and bolts of that apart and trying not to do it damage as you do it, because it's it's the classic changing the tyre on a bike as you do in the race. It's got to be handled with care. I think we've got to. I'm really pleased at who the RFL is now and what it's responsible for. I'm really excited about some of the things that we've got. We've got 2021 and everything that builds towards that. So I'm massively enthusiastic about where we are, but I'm not saying, and Robert wouldn't either, that it's not been a difficult process to get us to this
But history
point.
tells us it doesn't work. and that when it happened in the past, it was 2 years before the bodies came back together. Surely there is an unnecessary overduplication of resources in a sport that hasn't got a lot of finance.
Well, the whole intent is that we produce some more finance from it, and proof will be in the pudding. All I can say is that I get up every morning and I'm really pleased about what we're doing, and I know there will always be people that can pull at the threads at what we can do, and we're never daft enough to pretend we're doing everything right, because we're never going to go forward if you do that.
Maybe you ought to be involved in the Brexit negotiations, Ralph. I think you've just described two bodies coming
apart about that. Come on.
That has a resonance, doesn't it?
How long does this programme last?
It does seem, though, from a Super League perspective, that Robert's been here a year now. He made his mark last week, Martyn, with some comments he made in response to Wayne Bennett. Didn't get received all too favourably, it has to be said. What was your take on what Robert had to say?
Well, I think there's a difficulty there when you've got a coach of England or Great Britain, or England and Great Britain, who's also a coach of an Australian club. Eamon McManus was the person who was really angry because of an approach that South Sydney apparently made to Luke Thompson. Luke Thompson has 18 months left on his contract, and Eamon has been absolutely clear that they will not agree to release him under any circumstances before that contract ends. And if by that stage Luke wants to go to Australia, then they'll give him a great send-off, just as they did with James Graham a few years ago. But I think it's always difficult when you're serving two masters. If you're a club coach and a rep coach, who do you give your first loyalty to? I mean, obviously Wayne Bennett, I think, is a man of tremendous integrity, and he will do the best for both his club and England and Great Britain. But it's quite awkward when he makes the point that players, or appears to make the point that players will enhance their chance of getting representative honours by going to the NRL. I think that raises alarm bells among Super League clubs.
Did he suggest that, though? Did he not just suggest, Phil, that Ryan Sutton has been...
Well, that's how some people interpreted it.
I mean, he's been starting games at South Sydney, which he wasn't at Wigan, and he's proved that he can play that role. Wasn't that more the suggestion than...
I thought the comments as a press release, not attributed necessarily to Robert or whoever, were petty and unnecessary, and showed the fact that there is still a division. And that with Wayne Bennett over here for a short period of time, with international game being an aid for everybody, and I think one of the things that we really missed out on last weekend was not having some international window in the Northern Hemisphere. I think we needed that to promote Great Britain. We needed it to have interviews with Wayne Bennett, who is a fascinating character, and to have that tainted by some overly zealous Super League chairman that took offence to a comment that he made. Well, I think undermined the fact that we had him here.
Well, in Eamon's case, it was that comment plus the apparent approach
but it's the food chain, isn't it? It's the food chain.
No, I would say... I'm going to defend Wayne's honour, certainly.
Oh, no need to.
Wayne, he had a fantastic week with us last week, and that's with all of the England squads, everybody in the England performance unit, and all their coaching staff. He did some great stuff for us with Great Britain as well. And the only thing I would say is Wayne has been coaching representative rugby league for more than 2 decades, I would imagine. So you've got State of Origin, you have Australia, you have New Zealand, you have England. I spent some good time with him last week. I don't think you get to flip on that level if people don't trust what you do. Think of how many club players have been entrusted to Wayne's care over that period. And everybody still wants him to coach their squad. So he's a great coach. I think his integrity is absolutely unquestionable.
I don't doubt that, but it's just that a conflict of interest doesn't mean that there's any loss of integrity on the part of individuals. It just means that there's a potential for it to be viewed in that way. And that's the unfortunate thing.
But if South Sydney wanted Luke Thompson tomorrow, because of the respective amounts of money that the two leagues can spend, they would happily compensate St Helens for him.
Well, they might do.
It's just the way that it works, isn't it?
While we're on recruitment, should we talk about this very lively merry-go-round that seems to be going on in Super League at the minute, with Leeds signing players, Hull KR signing players? The top and bottom of it is that Rob Louis looks like he's going to Leeds as we record this. Matt Parcell will go to Hull KR. It looks like Sean Lunt will go to Leeds as well, and then there could be all sorts that comes off the back of that. What do we think, Martyn? What's your take on what the clubs are trying to do, and Leeds giving a relegation rival one of their players potentially?
Well, they're doing it because, of course, of the overseas quota. I mean, they can only sign Rob Louis if they can make a place available on the overseas quota, and that appears to be Matt Parcell moving to Hull Kingston Rovers, Sean Lunt coming in the other direction, and Junior Vai going to Toulouse, because, of course, he's on the overseas quota at Hull KR. So, you know, it looks a bit of a merry-go-round. Whether Rob Louis is the guy who's going to get Leeds out of trouble is, you know, something that we wait to see. And obviously Leeds fans will be hoping that that he does. But Leeds have also apparently made a very significant bid for Jackson Hastings. But again, whereas I think Salford fans are prepared to see Rob Louis go for a transfer fee because they know the club could do with the money, I think they'd be far more reluctant to see Jackson Hastings go anywhere other than Salford for this season.
Let's talk about Jackson Hastings first. Phil, do you expect Jackson Hastings to play in Leeds colours either this season or next season?
I think all we can say at the moment is that I think he'll see out this season with Salford. I think we're past the point where the negotiations can be done with 10 weeks of the season left for him to go anywhere, whether that's Leeds or Wigan or even back to the NRL. So I think Salford fans can be reassured that they've got their man for the remainder of this year. I think he's made it clear he's not going to be there next year. Where he goes, obviously, will become a bit of an auction, and that will depend on which teams are in that division and how much he's valued to bring to that team. I think if he goes as a free agent, it changes the dynamic as well. His money can go to him rather than necessarily to Salford. So they're in a bit of a cleft stick. In some respects, financially, it would be advantageous if he went now because they could cash in on his talent. But I think he'll see out the season. The interesting thing is that there's one person who's not being mentioned in all of this, and that's Joey Lussick. And they came as a pair, Hastings and Lussick. And I think part of the ability for Hastings to do what he does and is brilliant at is the service he gets from a guy who's played all his career with. Now, I'm not advocating in any way whatsoever that he should leave Salford, but I think the Jackson Hastings you get is a better player if he's alongside someone who he clearly has grown up with.
That's a really interesting point, actually, I've got to say.
Ralph, have you known it be quite this lively on the recruitment front at this stage of a year?
No, not for several seasons, and I think it's a real testament to what's going on. You know, what Super League are doing. We are four of us sitting on here. We could talk this to death on who's likely to go where and all the different permutations, and it is exciting. There's some real tension in that competition, and there's a lot of talent. The conversations about players. Callum going off to the NRL. We have a lot of talent playing in this competition. We produce a lot of talent now, world-class talent. And there are some players such as Jackson Hastings that add to that mix, and it just produces this kind of crescendo of interplay right as we come into the end of the season, and we can talk it to death. It's fantastic.
Can we expect to see Matt running around all the grounds on transfer deadline day, getting the scoops?
Martyn won't let me out of the office.
That's what we need, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the things we haven't talked about, but is germane to everything we have, is that raising the profile of the sport.
Yeah.
Sure.
And to have these transfer discussion points, fans love it.
Yeah, of course they do.
Well,
And the media love it.
I can give some insight on that. We last year did a blog online for transfer deadline, and it was the most viewed thing in the entire year, comfortably. So people love it. People love it. And
we need to exploit that.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that some of the players we've mentioned, I mean, Jackson Hastings was a signing last year that Salford made, and it left Manly under a bit of a cloud, apparently. And a few Super League clubs were somewhat reluctant to sign him, I think, and Salford took the plunge. And he's been absolutely outstanding, for them, as you say, with Joe Lussick too. And there've been one or two signings like that from sort of left field, I would say. I mean, the best example this year is Ratu Naulango at Hull FC, who's come out of the Army Sevens team, apparently, seemingly coming out of nowhere, and he's been outstanding. His try last weekend from inside his own in-goal area, beating a couple of Catalans players and then running the length of the field, was absolutely outstanding. We made it the League Express Try of the Week. But actually, last week there were so many potential candidates for that. We always do that every week in the paper, don't we? And you know, there were just so many. You know, it meant we didn't pick Tommy Makinson's strike.
I think you make another very interesting point, though, about where he's come from. And you talk about, you know, expanding out of our traditional markets. The armed forces, there are players there that clearly have a talent that we haven't tapped into yet. I think the student game is one, and you know the student game really well, that perhaps we haven't done enough to keep track of the people that are either friends of the sport that we can go to in a commercial relationship, or are players. You know, Alex Walmsley reinvigorated his career by playing in a student environment.
It's interesting you say that. It's been one of my absolute front lines this year that we're setting up something that well, as rugby league alumni, effectively, you're right. It's not just all about playing talent. In fact, it's far broader than that. You know, there are so many. And Martyn was involved in it way back when as well. There are so many people that have gone on to do great things that have got a real affinity with student rugby league, even if they just touched it for the 3 years they were out there. I went to a dinner in Bristol a couple of years ago, and I was sat with the mayor of Bristol, who was a really kind of cool young fella, great guy. I said something about rugby league and said, I used to play in student rugby league, and he played at Cardiff. And you find them all over the place, and I just want to gel them together and make them work.
Out of interest, what happened to that Bristol club? There was supposed to be the merger, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Whatever
Sporting
happened
Club
to
of Bristol. They were going to take it on, but then didn't in the end, and then that kind of retracted. So we just worked on the legacy of what went on in Gloucester.
Fair enough. Martyn, just quickly, we've got about 90 seconds of this part left. People are saying, because London and Salford have been doing well, that it actually shows that the standard's going down. I have no idea where they get that logic from. That's surely unfair.
Well, I think that's nonsense, and you can never really talk about the standard definitively, actually, because all you can do is look at the games and say, are they competitive? Are they exciting? Are they compelling? And I think this season is the most compelling season we've had for many, many years. So whether the standard is up, down, or just the same, doesn't really matter. It's the spectacle that's important, and I think it couldn't be better at the moment.
Agreed, James?
I've no idea how you measure it. I think that's the first thing. But I think we'd all like to see 12 teams competing at the top rather than a focus on 7 teams competing at the bottom. Now, how you ever get to that, and if you ever do, I've no idea.
I am going to drag you back from that, though, because I don't just think it's about 12 teams. And I think it's, you know, our competitions in general. We had the Student Rugby League home internationals last weekend. We've got the Women's Rugby League. You know, I got a Rugby League continuously over the weekend, and there's just some fantastic facets of our sport at this moment in time.
Well, I think we all agree on that. That's the latest part of this week's show, wrapped up after a short break. We'll speak much more, including about Ottawa and New York. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the final part of this week's Rugby League Backchat. Don't forget, you can join the conversation too on Twitter at RL Backchat. Ralph, I'll come to you because I want to ask you about Ottawa and New York. Sure. It was announced about a month ago that New York would be coming in 2021, but provisionally Ottawa will be 2020. Now, it's gone quiet since then.
Yep.
What is the latest with Ottawa? Do you think they'll be in next year?
Well, I would hope so, but it's important that when they do come in, they are a credit to the competition, and they're not vulnerable in any way. So New York and Ottawa were given the same pathway, but just on different timescales. Ottawa have been given the opportunity to join in 20, provided they get over certain hurdles between now and then. And should they do that, they will be in the fixture list in November. If they don't, they'll get pushed to 21. And likewise, New York at this moment in time have been given the same kind of trajectory, but it will be for entry in 2021. It's really, really important that we do our due diligence properly. It's very easy to say, everybody in, we'll see you there. But in the end, we've got the concerns of all the rest of our stakeholders in there. We've got the reputation of the competition to think about. When they arrive, we want them to arrive in good shape so they add real value to the competition.
Realistically, though, sorry, Phil, I was just going to say, we're nearly in July.
Yeah.
None of the people who look after players seem to think that they've been in contact regarding putting a squad together.
Yeah.
It surely looks unlikely now that they're going to be ready for if they haven't jumped over these hurdles yet. Surely it's going to be difficult for them to do everything they need to do by November.
Well, potentially, but the timescale's laid out. So if they fail, well, if they get delayed, they get delayed. But as I say, the difference between the two offers were that Ottawa has an inbuilt sporting infrastructure. It's Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group. They have an ability to sell a ticket tomorrow. They have an ability to market tomorrow. They even have some athletes that are there ready to take on as well. So New York are a little bit further down the line than that. So Ottawa have a distinct advantage, but nevertheless, they still have to get over the hurdles to arrive in November and get themselves into the fixture list.
Did the governing body do enough due diligence on Toronto?
Well, you know, I get asked that question a lot. What have you got in Toronto? You've got a club that functions pretty well. You've got a 10,000 crowd, roughly, and you've got a guy with a great deal of money that wants to put it in. So all of those things exist and are real, and David has put a great deal of money into the team. Nobody can deny that. So when I get asked that question, those are the facts. We got it to this point, and it wasn't actually David in the first instance that set the club up. It was Eric and Corey, and you know, David then bought into the club. So that was the journey that took. So I think we tick the boxes pretty well as we go along. We all know that there are some clubs that are to some degree dependent on a benefactor. We're far better than many, many sports in that respect, but nevertheless that's true. And if that benefactor were to walk away, whichever club it is, then that would have a significant impact on that particular club. That vulnerability exists with several clubs, but as I say, as sports go, we're in far better shape than many others.
Phil, can I just throw that back to you? When you ask that question, do you then believe that there wasn't, and if so, why?
No, I just think that maybe as they progress through the ranks, the goalposts for Toronto are changing.
In what sense?
I think you're absolutely right that what they bring to the sport is exactly what the sport needs. New markets, new people, potentially new television deals, which I have a little bit of a worry about if you've got Toronto maybe in Super League and Ottawa starting in League One. I don't know how you reconcile that and get a television deal. But speaking to some of the people at Toronto, they seem to think that the map they were originally given, which they made no unavowed secret that they wanted to be in Super League as quickly as they can, has changed and been redrawn. And I just wonder if that's because as a sport we perhaps could be accused of being reactive rather than proactive.
This leads me wonderfully onto a debate that's been going on for the last couple of weeks, that Toronto may potentially turn down promotion. I can't get my head around it, if I'm honest. Can you give us any insight into this?
Again, that's you know, I hear the rumours all the time. I would be staggered.
Tell that to Brian McDermott.
Staggered. Yeah, I wouldn't like to tell it to Brian McDermott. No.
I'm glad we can put that one to bed. On another front, we spoke earlier on about recruitment. Two clubs, which have actually been the two we spoke about, London and Salford, they've been quite vocal in raising their concerns about how it works at the minute, that it's May the 1st, that players can sign elsewhere. Ian Blease has been not very complimentary of the fact that clubs can, you know, get players to pose with other clubs' scars while they're still employed by another club. Is there an issue there? Is it something that the RFL are looking at?
Well, we'd probably look at that biannually.
Yeah.
We look at it with the clubs. Karen Moorhouse, our Chief Regulatory Officer, sits down, runs regulatory meetings with all the clubs. That transfer deadline, there's just no right answer to it. There is absolutely no right answer. And we move it by a month or so. You know, there's an argument to say get rid of it altogether, and just because policing it's almost impossible anyway.
Well, the same problems will arise whenever you have it.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that my suggestion is there should just be one simple regulation that says that you can't, if you sign a player as a club who's still in contract when you sign him to another club, you're not allowed to parade him in your club's colours. You know,
That's just common decency.
Which is common decency, it seems to me. But, you know, some clubs do it. So maybe there should be a regulation, a simple regulation just saying you're not allowed to do that. You'll never stop them signing.
You won't solve the other one.
No,
Just
no.
won't do it.
Yeah, but if we're honest, even though it's a May 1st deadline, none of us really believe that there's no negotiation going on before May the 1st, do we? You would never get anyone accepting that, but that's just the truth of it.
You know, I've been on both
And
sides.
it depends what you mean by negotiation as well, you know,
does,
because that's not always easy to define.
No, it isn't.
No.
That's why it's impossible to police it.
Yeah.
The 1895 Cup,
Yes.
it's coming for some criticism from coaches, players, whoever else. What's your take on the state of the competition, how it's gone so far and where it's going?
I'm glad you've asked this question. First of all, we sat down with all the Super League, Championship League One chief executives and chairman and said, we've got this idea, this concept, but it's only going to work if you're going to throw your weight behind it. It will need some midweek fixtures, but it does give TUI the opportunity to do something really special and create something that doesn't exist at this moment in time, but has the ability to develop into another property. And just as I said before, Phil, it's about repositioning certain things that we do. So, do you want to be on this journey or not? Because it's going to fail if you don't. But we think it's got some possibilities. This, and unanimously, they all said they definitely wanted to do it. And of course, that changes when a coach, you know, gets upset because he has to put a team out midweek, and perhaps there isn't a good communication between the chief executive and the coach. And I absolutely understand it's easy to sort things out in the clear blue water of the off season, as opposed to the cut and thrust of season. Nevertheless, that is the case. But we think something's developing pretty well at this moment in time. We've just sent out to clubs last night to inform them of the kind of prize money we're going to put in place, because it's got some momentum. And this is not about year one either. You shouldn't get too distracted by that. This is 2, 3, 4, 5 and beyond. So, you know, again, you know, people can definitely nip at the threads that hang out. Absolutely right, they will. And they will do forever. But nevertheless, do I think we're going to do something pretty exciting with it? Yes, I do.
I think
It's a brilliant idea. I mean, the thought of, say, and I'm picking these two teams at random, Lee playing York at Wembley, or Widnes getting back to Wembley, is magnificent. I think the issue is a bigger one about the length of the season in its entirety that covers both Super League, the Championship and League One. The fact that you're having to schedule games in midweek must tell us that there's something wrong with the fixture structure. I think also it goes back to the point made in the other half that we didn't have an international window this weekend, and I think the sport lost something out of that. We had Wayne Bennett over here. If that had leaked into the fact that England or the England Knights were playing, we had the wheelchair team over in France. You can imagine if, you know, Jamaica were playing an international over here. Maybe if Fiji had come over here, you could have started this weekend with games in the Southern Hemisphere and had internationals going right throughout the world, culminating in the Caribbean. That, again, is something that I think is overarching the fact that we've got two governing bodies at the moment, and we need to get that right somehow.
Well, you know, we've come to an agreement on that. We have got, between now and 2021, I think we've got a pretty exciting international programme. I agree we didn't do this weekend just gone, but nevertheless, by the end of this season, running up to the Kangaroos at the end of next season, and then into the World Cup, with some of the mid-season stuff we'll have, and of course the Knights, and the women and the wheelchair. There's more announcements to come in all of those particular facets of our game. We will have an international programme which is absolutely designed to land us in the right place at the right time in 2021.
When are you going to announce the venues for the Kangaroo Tour? Because the one thing we consistently get wrong is we don't put tickets on sale early enough.
Very soon. It will be. There's some good work being done on it. I can't disclose them yet, but we're not a million miles away at this moment.
We're going to Tottenham. Are we going to Tottenham?
I'm not saying just at this moment in time.
Thought I'd worth a go.
It was worth a go. Just to pull you back, my ears pricked up when you mentioned prize money, because I think one of the criticisms by some of the clubs has been it can actually cost us money to host these games because the crowds haven't been good for it. It's year one and you've got to build it up, as you said. Is it going to be significant enough that it's going to appeal? We know that they look at the money, don't they? Is it going to be significant enough to pull them in then, the prize?
I think what we've put on the table to clubs last night, they'll be pretty pleased to see how we've done it. It costs £100,000 to open Wembley for that extra game before you start, and then everything else added on. So that's your risk immediately. That's a risk, plus other bits and pieces as well. But if you're going to start a journey, you need to start it. And say when we sat around the table with them, again, we said it's not going to be perfect. Some of the things you've described are absolutely true, absolutely true. But nevertheless, it's the Thelma and Louise moment, is that we're going to hold hands and we're going to try and do something different. Yeah. Yes, everyone that's in that club, everyone that's in that cup unanimously wanted to be in it. Nobody was forced into it. So when you hear a coach bleating about, we have to play midweek, and the RFL, I listened to one at one of the fixtures recently when I was stood in the room after the game and he was kicking off about the RFL did this and that. It wasn't the RFL actually, it was everybody that's in the competition, and everybody that sat around that table wanted to do it. And believe me, when we get to the semi-finals and the finals, those 2 teams will be really delighted to be there, and it's because we took a risk and did something.
Here's the other thing, you mentioned that opening up Wembley for the other game cost some money. You played it after the Challenge Cup final. Was that the initial view for the competition? Will it change next year? Will it be the curtain raiser?
Don't know. Well, as you would expect, we'll do a debrief on how it went. What we aimed to do was make sure people could get back to the north if they wanted to after the game. That was the key. So the timing was key on that. And we'll just see how it rolls out and whether it works for people. We will do a fan survey afterwards. We are trying really hard this year and last to consult more and more with people, so we get evidential feedback when we make decisions. We can point to something, so if it does change for 2020, we can say, well, it changed because of this.
Yeah, I want to actually at that point plug our league a little bit, because that's been your way of communicating with people, and it seems to be provisionally very successful so far. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, from a standing start, and again, it was a little experimental, again, about positioning our sport, knowing more about our customers, understanding them, communicating with them. So we went from a standing start to, I think we're about 120,000 members now that we can speak to direct. I'm pretty pleased with that. Yeah,
is one thing that you need to do, get some unique timing? Because I think that one of the issues is, for example, the women's game is one of our great successes.
Absolutely fantastic.
And I think it's absolutely sensational that their cup final will be part of the Bolton semi-finals. I think we talk about new audiences and repositioning. You've got a whole new sector to go at. But the problem is, to use an example from this weekend, you had the women's Challenge Cup game between Wigan and St Helens at 12 o'clock. Yeah. You had another game in that competition kicking off at 12 o'clock, which was being live streamed by the club concerned. Yeah. Do you need to do a bit more work to say, if we're going to have our league and we need more people to watch it, we've got to be a bit more proactive about what we show and what time we show it? Yes.
All of this is learning for us. And the Our League is the same as the 1895 Cup and lots of the other, the Women's Super League, the wheelchair, the physical disability rugby league, and the learning disability rugby league. We are trying to grow the rugby league family in lots of different directions all at the same time. We're trying to land it on platforms that we hadn't developed before. We're trying to reach new audiences and bring them in and talk to them. And that's a lot to do all at once.
But I mean, for example, your League One game that you had on was on at the same time as about 6 other games.
No, I'm
saying you have got an idea there, but are you exploiting it to best advantage?
No, we're not, Phil. That's exactly right. You're right. All of those criticisms are absolutely valid. We are not perfect in what we're doing, and we grow and you stub your toe a little bit, and then you grow a little bit more. And when we sit round the table with the Championship and League One clubs, we said we can talk to them about moving kick-off times to 7 on a Sunday night and all those things that they don't necessarily want to do.
Please don't do that.
No, that's true.
Martyn's smart at Leeds Express.
And that's the point, isn't it? You think that's a good idea, then Martyn says, no, that's a terrible idea. You think, how are we ever going to solve it? But that's the point. But nevertheless, they're all on this journey with us. All of those elements of the sport that I refer to and we refer to, the bits that we're using to try and reposition ourselves. It is not perfect. weekend, myself and Mark Foster's and Karen's and Tony's phone go berserk with people saying, why have you done this, why have you done this? That is all true, but we're just trying to get better and grow.
One of the
Martyn,
things
Martyn, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to stop you there. We've grilled Ralph far too much and we've run out of time. A big thanks to my guests this week, Martyn Sadler, Phil Caplan and Ralph, who will definitely need a drink after that. Don't forget, you can join the conversation too on Twitter @RL Backchat. We'll be back next week for another edition. Bye-bye for now.